Sarah Martinez stood at the edge of the training compound, her military boots firmly planted on the concrete ground. The morning sun cast long shadows across the base as she adjusted her uniform one final time. Today was different from all the other days she had spent preparing for this moment. She had worked for 3 years to get here, 3 years of pushing her body beyond its limits, studying tactical manuals until her eyes burned, and proving to everyone that she belonged in this elite world. The Navy SEAL training program had never seen a female officer like her before, and she knew all eyes would be watching. The other trainees were already gathering in the main hall. Sarah could hear their voices echoing through the corridors, a mix of nervous energy and forced confidence. She had met most of them during the preliminary training sessions. Some were friendly, others kept their distance, but all of them respected her skills. Commander James Wilson was known throughout the military as one of the toughest instructors in the program. He had trained hundreds of SEALs over his 15-year career, and his reputation for pushing trainees to their absolute limits was legendary. Sarah had heard stories about his training methods, some that made even the strongest soldiers question their commitment. As she walked toward the assembly hall, Sarah noticed how quiet the base had become. The usual sounds of equipment being moved and orders being shouted had faded into an unusual silence. She knew that today's exercise would be unlike anything she had experienced before, but she felt ready for whatever challenge awaited her. The heavy doors of the hall opened with a loud creak and Sarah stepped inside. Nearly 200 trainees filled the space, all dressed in identical training gear. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. At the front of the room stood Commander Wilson, his stern expression giving no hint of what was about to unfold. Sarah found her position among the other officers and stood at attention. Her heart was beating steadily, but she felt calm and focused. This was the moment she had been preparing for her entire military career. She had overcome every obstacle placed in her path, and she was determined to prove that she deserved to be here among the best of the best. The commander began to speak, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. He explained that today's training would test not just their physical abilities, but their mental strength and their willingness to follow orders without question. Sarah listened carefully to every word, knowing that her response to whatever came next would determine her future in the program. Little did she know that this day would change everything, not just for her career, but for everyone in that room. The challenge that awaited her would reveal secrets from her past that she had kept hidden for years, and it would test her courage in ways she never imagined possible. Commander Wilson's voice cut through the silence like a sharp blade. His instructions were clear and direct, leaving no room for confusion or hesitation. The training exercise he described was designed to break down every barrier between the trainees and their mission objectives. It would test their ability to follow orders regardless of personal comfort or embarrassment. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as she listened to the details of what was expected. This was not the kind of training she had anticipated, but she understood that SEAL operations often required actions that pushed beyond normal boundaries. She had committed herself to this path, and backing down now would mean throwing away years of hard work and dedication. The other trainees shifted uncomfortably around her, but none of them spoke or moved from their positions. The discipline they had learned during their months of preparation held them in place, even as uncertainty filled their minds. Sarah could see the tension in their faces, the same mixture of determination and concern that she felt building inside herself. Commander Wilson explained that this exercise was based on real situations that SEALs might face in hostile territory. He spoke about the importance of mental toughness and the ability to maintain focus under extreme pressure. His words carried the weight of experience from countless missions where split-second decisions had meant the difference between life and death. Sarah thought about all the obstacles she had already overcome to reach this point. She had faced discrimination and doubt from those who believed women had no place in elite military units. She had pushed her body through training that left many male soldiers unable to continue. She had proven herself time and again, and she was not about to let this challenge defeat her. The commander's eyes swept across the room, making contact with each trainee as he continued his explanation. When his gaze reached Sarah, she met it directly, showing no sign of fear or hesitation. She had learned long ago that showing weakness in this environment was not an option. Her determination was visible in every line of her posture and every expression on her face. As the minutes passed, the reality of what was about to happen began to sink in for everyone in the room. This was not a theoretical exercise or a classroom discussion. It was a real test that would require them to set aside their personal boundaries and trust in their training. Sarah knew that her response to this moment would be remembered and evaluated for the rest of her time in the program. The silence in the hall was broken only by the sound of breathing and the occasional shift of weight from one foot to another. 200 of the military's finest trainees stood ready to face whatever challenge their commander presented to them. Sarah took a deep breath and prepared herself for what was coming, knowing that there was no turning back from this moment. The order came with military precision and absolute authority. Commander Wilson's voice left no room for interpretation or delay. Sarah felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes watching as she stepped forward from the formation. Her training had taught her to respond to commands immediately and without question. But this moment felt different from every other test she had faced. Her hands moved to her uniform with steady precision, despite the rapid beating of her heart. She had faced dangerous situations before, moments where her life depended on quick thinking and calm action. But standing in front of her fellow trainees, she felt a different kind of vulnerability that no amount of combat training could have prepared her for. The silence in the room was absolute. Not a single trainee moved or spoke as Sarah began to follow the commander's instructions. She could feel the tension radiating from everyone around her, a mixture of shock, respect, and uncertainty about what they were witnessing. Some looked away out of respect, while others watched with the clinical attention that their training had taught them to maintain. Sarah's military bearing never wavered. Years of discipline and service had taught her to maintain her composure regardless of the circumstances. She understood that this was not about humiliation or degradation, but about testing the absolute limits of their commitment to following orders. In real combat situations, SEALs might face demands that challenged every personal boundary they had ever maintained. Commander Wilson watched with the same stern expression he maintained during every training exercise. His face showed no emotion, no indication of whether he approved or disapproved of what was happening. This was simply another test in a long series of challenges designed to identify those who had the mental strength to become Navy SEALs. As Sarah continued to follow the orders, she thought about her family and the sacrifices they had made to support her military career. Her father had served in the Marines for 20 years, and he had taught her that true strength came from the ability to do what was necessary, even when it was difficult or uncomfortable. Her mother had always told her that breaking barriers required courage that most people could never understand. The other trainees remained perfectly still, their training overriding any natural impulses they might have felt. They had all volunteered for this program knowing that it would push them beyond their comfort zones. Each of them had faced their own moments of doubt and determination during the months of preparation that had brought them to this point. Sarah's focus remained sharp and clear. She had made a commitment to herself and to her country to become the best soldier she could possibly be. This moment was another step on that journey, another test of her dedication to the mission that had driven her since she first decided to pursue a military career. She would not allow anything to shake her resolve or compromise her goals. As Sarah turned her back to the assembled trainees, the intricate tattoo that covered her spine became visible for the first time. The artwork was breathtaking in its detail and complexity, stretching from the base of her neck down to her lower back. It depicted a phoenix rising from flames, its wings spread wide in a symbol of rebirth and triumph over adversity. Commander Wilson's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. His composed military bearing cracked for just a moment, his eyes widening, as he recognized something in the tattoo that no one else in the room could understand. His face went pale, and his jaw tensed as memories that he had buried for years suddenly came flooding back to the surface. The phoenix tattoo was not just decorative artwork. Hidden within the intricate design were symbols and details that told a story of survival, courage, and loss. Sarah had gotten the tattoo 5 years earlier, during one of the darkest periods of her life. It represented her determination to rise above circumstances that had nearly destroyed her spirit and her faith in herself. Commander Wilson remembered that tattoo from a classified mission that had gone terribly wrong. He had been part of a rescue operation in hostile territory, where his team had found a young intelligence officer who had been captured and held for weeks. The officer had survived interrogation and torture through sheer willpower and an unbreakable spirit that had impressed everyone involved in the rescue. The rescued officer had been Sarah Martinez, though she had been serving under a different name and assignment at the time. The mission details were classified at the highest levels, and Wilson had been ordered never to discuss what had happened during those weeks. He had filed his reports and moved on to other assignments, but he had never forgotten the courage he had witnessed during that rescue operation. Sarah had no idea that Commander Wilson had been part of her rescue team. The entire operation had been conducted in darkness and confusion, with multiple teams working together to extract her from enemy territory. She had been unconscious for much of the evacuation, and the debriefing sessions that followed had focused on the intelligence she had gathered rather than the identities of her rescuers. The room remained silent as the seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The other trainees sensed that something significant was happening, but they had no context to understand what they were witnessing. They maintained their military discipline while trying to process the tension that had suddenly filled the air between their commander and their fellow trainee. Wilson struggled to maintain his professional composure as he processed this unexpected reunion. The young officer he had helped rescue had clearly recovered from her ordeal and rebuilt her career with remarkable determination. Seeing her now, standing confidently before 200 elite trainees, filled him with a complex mixture of pride, respect, and haunting memories of that dangerous mission years ago. Commander Wilson called an immediate halt to the exercise, his voice cutting through the silence with unexpected urgency. He ordered all trainees to return to their quarters while he conducted a private evaluation session. The 200 soldiers filed out of the hall with disciplined efficiency. But curiosity and confusion were written on every face as they left Sarah alone with their commander. Sarah quickly dressed and stood at attention, unsure why the exercise had ended so abruptly. She had followed orders exactly as instructed and felt confident that she had demonstrated the mental toughness required for SEAL training. The sudden change in Wilson's demeanor left her wondering if she had somehow failed a test she did not fully understand. Wilson waited until the last trainee had left the hall before speaking. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the commanding tone he had used during the exercise. He asked Sarah to sit down, a request that surprised her since their relationship had been strictly formal and hierarchical throughout her time in the program. Something in his expression told her that this conversation would be unlike any they had shared before. The commander began to speak about a classified mission from 5 years earlier, carefully choosing his words to avoid revealing details that remained restricted. He described a rescue operation in hostile territory, where his team had extracted an intelligence officer who had shown extraordinary courage under impossible circumstances. As he spoke, Sarah began to realize that he was describing events from her own past. Recognition dawned slowly as Wilson continued his careful explanation. Sarah remembered fragments of her rescue, brief moments of consciousness during the evacuation when she had seen the faces of her liberators. The mission had been a blur of pain, relief, and overwhelming gratitude toward the soldiers who had risked their lives to bring her home safely. Wilson explained that he had recognized the Phoenix tattoo immediately because he had been present when Sarah had first described her plans for the artwork during her recovery. She had spoken about wanting a permanent reminder of her survival and her determination to rebuild her life stronger than before. The tattoo had become a symbol of her transformation from victim to survivor to warrior. The conversation that followed was unlike anything either of them had expected when the day began. Wilson shared his memories of the rescue mission and the impression Sarah had made on his entire team. He described how her courage under captivity had inspired the soldiers involved in her extraction and how her case had become a teaching example in survival and resistance training programs. Sarah found herself opening up about the years since her rescue, the long process of recovery, and the determination that had driven her to pursue SEAL training. She explained how the experience had changed her perspective on service and sacrifice, and how it had strengthened her commitment to protecting others who might face similar situations. The tattoo had become more than just a personal symbol. It represented her promise to use her survival as motivation to help others. The revelation of their shared history transformed the entire dynamic of Sarah's training experience. Commander Wilson found himself facing a profound conflict between his role as an impartial instructor and his personal knowledge of Sarah's extraordinary background. He had witnessed firsthand the mental toughness that qualified her for SEAL training, but he also understood the unique challenges she had already overcome. Wilson made a decision that went against standard protocol. He shared with Sarah some of the classified details about her rescue mission, information that had been withheld from her during the debriefing process years earlier. He described how her captors had tried every method available to break her spirit and extract information, but she had maintained her silence and her dignity throughout weeks of interrogation. Sarah learned for the first time about the complexity of the operation that had saved her life. Multiple teams had worked for days to locate her position and plan an extraction that would not result in additional casualties. Wilson's team had been just one part of a larger effort that involved dozens of elite soldiers and intelligence specialists working around the clock to bring her home safely. Commander explained that Sarah's case had become a study in survival psychology and resistance training. Her methods for maintaining mental strength during captivity had been analyzed and incorporated into training programs for other intelligence officers. Without her knowledge, her experience had been helping to prepare other soldiers for similar situations they might face in hostile territory. Wilson also revealed that he had been following Sarah's career progress through official channels since her recovery. Her return to active duty and her pursuit of elite training opportunities had impressed his superiors throughout the military hierarchy. Her application to SEAL training had been approved, partly based on recommendations that referenced her proven ability to perform under extreme pressure. The conversation lasted for hours as both Wilson and Sarah processed the unexpected connection between their past and present circumstances. They discussed the psychological impact of her captivity and rescue, the ways it had shaped her approach to military service, and the unique perspective it gave her on the demands of special operations work. Sarah began to understand that her placement in Wilson's training program was not entirely coincidental. The military leadership had specifically assigned her to work with an instructor who understood her background and could properly evaluate her readiness for the most demanding missions. Wilson had been chosen not just for his expertise in training SEALs, but for his personal knowledge of Sarah's capabilities under pressure. As the day drew to a close, both Wilson and Sarah realized that their professional relationship would never be the same. The formal distance between instructor and trainee had been replaced by a deeper understanding built on shared experience and mutual respect. They would continue with the training program, but with a new foundation of trust and recognition that would influence every interaction that followed. The remaining weeks of SEAL training took on a different character for both Sarah and Commander Wilson. Their shared understanding created an unspoken bond that influenced every aspect of her preparation for elite military service. Wilson pushed Sarah harder than any other trainee, not out of favoritism, but because he knew she possessed the mental strength to handle challenges that might break other soldiers. Sarah's performance during the final phases of training was exceptional by any measure. She completed obstacle courses that eliminated half of her fellow trainees, mastered combat techniques that required months of practice, and demonstrated leadership abilities that impressed every instructor in the program. Her fellow trainees began to look to her for guidance and motivation when their own resolve wavered. The other soldiers in the program never learned the full details of what had transpired between Sarah and Commander Wilson on that pivotal day. They understood that something significant had happened, and they respected the privacy that surrounded whatever connection existed between their instructor and their fellow trainee. The incident became part of the training legend, spoken about in whispers but never fully explained. Wilson's final evaluation of Sarah was the strongest recommendation he had ever written for a SEAL candidate. He documented her technical skills, her leadership potential, and her ability to perform under pressure, but he also included classified references to her proven record of survival and resistance. His report ensured that Sarah would be assigned to the most challenging and important missions available to newly qualified SEALs. Sarah graduated from the program with honors, becoming one of the first women to successfully complete SEAL training. Her achievement was celebrated throughout the military, but she knew that her success was built on more than just the months of preparation she had completed with her fellow trainees. The phoenix tattoo on her back had become a symbol not just of her personal survival, but of her transformation into a warrior capable of protecting others. Years later, both Sarah and Wilson would look back on that day as a turning point in their careers and their understanding of military service. The unexpected reunion had reminded them both that the bonds forged in combat and crisis extend far beyond individual missions or assignments. They had discovered that their shared experience created a connection that transcended rank, protocol, and the formal structures of military hierarchy. Sarah went on to lead multiple successful operations as a Navy SEAL, always carrying with her the lessons learned during captivity and the knowledge that survival was possible even in the darkest circumstances. Wilson continued training elite soldiers, but he never forgot the day he realized that one of his trainees was someone whose courage he had witnessed firsthand in the most dangerous possible circumstances. The story of their reconnection became a reminder to everyone involved that the military community is smaller and more interconnected than it might appear. The bonds formed during the most challenging moments of service create lasting connections that can emerge unexpectedly, bringing together people whose paths were shaped by shared experiences of courage, sacrifice, and survival against impossible odds.